for it. I'ma organize for it. Stay up in the night and in the morning, I'ma rise for it. Heart for it, mind for it, ears for it, eyes for it, peace and a place on this earth for me and mine for it. Work for it, ride for it, I'ma organize for it. Stay up in the night and in the morning, I'ma rise for it. Heart for it, mind for it, ears for it, eyes for it, peace and a place on this earth for me and mine for it.
Hey, peace, welcome. Thanks for tuning in. We got a really special episode of the Money, Power, Land, Solidarity podcast for you today. If you've been following our show, you know that our jumping off point, the catalyst for us starting this podcast, was looking at the Upper Harbor Terminal redevelopment project in North Minneapolis. For people who are just tuning in, the Upper Harbor Terminal is a 48-acre former industrial site. It was a port for shipping barges on the industrial riverfront in North Minneapolis. Has been slated for redevelopment, and the city has signed an exclusive rights agreement with United Properties, a real estate firm owned by one of the wealthiest white families in the country, the Pohlads, owners of the Minnesota Twins. And United Properties has partnered up with First Avenue to propose a music venue, housing, retail redevelopment of this former industrial site. This project has been highly contentious and has been a catalyst for a lot of community debate. If you're just now tuning in or just hearing about the Upper Harbor Terminal, I'd really encourage you to go back and listen to the first season of this podcast to get a perspective on the project and to hear about some of the implications, and also to look for other sources of information and perspective, because there's been other people reporting on and reflecting on this project. If you've been tuning into our show recently, you know that we had put season 2 of our podcast on hold because the community engagement process that was leading towards the city council vote was also put on hold because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So while they put that process on hold, we've been doing some reporting on how COVID-19 is impacting Minneapolis. But today, we're going to turn our attention back to the Upper Harbor Terminal because there's an important piece of breaking news that we want to bring to your attention. So despite the community engagement process around the Upper Harbor Terminal, the public meetings that were shaping the final plan that was going to go to City Council, despite that being put on indefinite pause, the $20 million state bonding request that the city is making for this development was still included in the draft bonding bill that was released at the state legislature this week. The city and the private development team are together requesting $20 million in state bonding money to finance the construction of a 7,000 to 10,000 person outdoor music venue at the Upper Harbor Terminal. The prospect of this First Avenue music venue has been a lightning rod during the years of debate around the Upper Harbor. Some are thrilled at the idea of a regional destination concert venue on the riverfront, and many others have real concern about the potential of this venue to bring traffic, noise, a lot of cars, a lot of people, and most threateningly, gentrification to North Minneapolis. We've heard people raise questions about a white-owned venue at this once-in-a-lifetime development, questions about who this venue will attract and who it will serve. Another point of great contention in the community around the music venue is the issue of public money and public benefit. $20 million of public money going to First Avenue for this music venue smacks of other stadium deals, where private entertainment industry titans get big public subsidies. But what's the cost benefit for working class Northsiders and Northeast community members? What type of jobs are going to be available here? What type of ownership potential does this public land have? What impacts will this have on an area that's already facing increasing gentrification pressures? The Fry administration and the city of Minneapolis have made this $20 million request for the music venue at the Upper Harbor the #1 bonding priority for the city, leapfrogging any other bonding projects to be the top priority that the city is asking for from the state. In February, I joined a number of other community members in St. Paul at the State House to make public comment asking that the state legislature do not include the Upper Harbor Terminal in this year's bonding bill. I did that because I believe the lack of concrete anti-displacement provisions in this plan guarantees that this influx of capital would displace and further gentrify North Minneapolis. I also pointed to the lack of public support for this development and real concerns about public subsidy for a private development being led by a billionaire white real estate firm. The city and supporters of the project also mobilized in February and put in comments from their side. The pre-COVID timeline was for the Minneapolis City Council to vote on an updated Upper Harbor Terminal concept plan in June. That was already after the state bonding bill would have been decided. Now, with the pandemic, it will certainly be even later than June that a vote happens at City Council. So that poses a serious question about democracy. How can the city claim to be engaging in good faith with the community to shape this development proposal, while at the same time pursuing $20 million for this plan that they claim is not yet set in stone? Why rush to give public money to a private development that will have generational impacts, especially when there has been consistent, intense, and growing pushback from the community? This is public land.
Hey, this is Isaac Specktor, producer of the Money, Power, Land, Solidarity podcast. I just wanted to thank y'all for tuning into the show. If you haven't already, we'd appreciate your support on patreon.com/Money, Power, Land, Solidarity. We have a bread and butter tier for $2 and $5 per month amounts. We're also planning to craft more exclusive content for patrons. Thanks again for supporting us. Peace.
There's no reason to force this bonding on an expedited timeline. The city's in the power position to hold the land, and I think there's much untapped potential that this bonding request, if granted, could forestall. I think the inclusion of this $20 million Upper Harbor Terminal bonding request from the city is even more problematic in the new context of the COVID-19 pandemic. There is a dire need for real wealth-building engines for the thousands of working-class people facing unemployment and harsh precariousness. And there's also an uncertain future for the entertainment industry. Both of those factors call this bonding request into deeper question. Is this our priority with public money right now? Is this what the exploited working class, the brown and the black and the poor North Minneapolis and Northeast residents, is this really what would be most beneficial for us? This is honestly a very important development in the struggle around the Upper Harbor Terminal, because a $20 million bond commitment from the state will make it much tougher for community to get a better deal or a new development plan at the Upper Harbor Terminal. This is a private development being led by the billionaire Pollad family's real estate firm United Properties that is poised to get a $20 million public subsidy before the community engagement process is even allowed to run its full course, and before the Minneapolis City Council has had a final vote. So because we feel like this moment is important and we want to raise awareness and get people talking about this bonding issue, we're going to release an interview that we were planning on including in season 2 of the show. We had the exciting opportunity to sit down with Dayna Frank, the owner and CEO of First Avenue, to talk about this Upper Harbor Terminal development. We talked about the music venue, we talked about the state bonding request, and we talked about a lot more. I first met Dayna Frank in probably 2017 through the public meetings surrounding this Upper Harbor Terminal project. Dayna and I have very different interests in and stances on this development and are generally on opposing sides of the public dialogue and in public meetings. But Dayna and I have also been able to communicate to maintain a degree of openness and dialogue that is not the case with most members of the development team. Dayna actually opened up the idea of coming on the podcast, and I really respect her directness and her willingness to be on the ground, hands-on, face-to-face, in dialogue with the community during this public process. I wanted to share that preparing for and conducting this interview was a catalyst for a lot of growth and reflection for me. My intention with this project is to create anti-capitalist socialist media and to advance a socialist vision for Minneapolis. I had to really sit and ask myself if it was responsible to platform an owner and a CEO. I also had to acknowledge and work with the interpersonal dynamics of class and power. I have a deep personal connection to this land and to the neighborhoods at stake in this project. And I've poured many hours and heart into raising awareness about and around the Upper Harbor Terminal, all while navigating a heavy student loan debt, impending default, and the stresses of paycheck to paycheck living in a gentrifying city. So while I was thrilled at the opportunity to interview Dayna, excited by the learning that we could share and the opportunity to engage directly with a real power player, at the same time I was hesitant if I'd be able to show up poised and confident and questioning my acumen and my intention doing journalism around this development. I'd also be lying if I said I didn't think about the consequences of this whole project really challenging the Upper Harbor Terminal development and my place in the Minneapolis music and hip-hop ecosystem. The last place I performed before quarantine was at First Avenue's Palace Theater in St. Paul, and frankly, I loved it. I've made many memories at First Avenue, and I want our local music industry to thrive. I want all my artist friends to thrive and all my service industry worker friends to thrive. I don't want to be seen as a hater or somebody who's just critical. And I don't want to bring trouble for myself or my friends or my associates who are trying to make a living and an impact as musicians. Looking back at all of this now, I gotta say I am very happy that I sat down and interviewed Dayna Frank. And I'm very thankful and appreciative for her willingness to join us and for the knowledge shared in her interview. Some of the clarity I found wrestling with the tensions I named above are around the necessity, the health, and the creative energy that can come from conflict. Conflict is a generative thing. And as the Marxist tradition teaches us, it's class conflict that moves history and change forward. In this interview, Dayna and I are able to disagree. And I think our dialogue can provide perspective and some insight for others and hopefully be a catalyst for creative thinking around public policy, economics, and the entertainment industry. I also walked away from my reflections affirmed and resolved in my commitment to working class politics, clear about the crucial necessity to reject the liberal common sense that assumes that there can be some kind of frictionless partnership between the owning class and the working class, or that working class people have common interests with owning class people when it comes to real estate development. You can't have real dialogue around real estate in the public realm without naming the conflict of interest between landlords and renters. A foundation of our politics and our strategy must be an acknowledgement that the poor and working classes are exploited under capitalism, that our structural position as wage workers and renters with no engine for wealth other than selling our labor power, we have different interests than the owning class that has capital, that owns buildings, that owns infrastructure, and has enough money to buy the labor power of others. Quite plainly, when it comes to the Upper Harbor Terminal, the propertied class benefits from gentrification. They profit from gentrification, while the working class, the renter class, suffer from gentrification, are displaced by gentrification. The entire process of the Upper Harbor Terminal demonstrates that the city and the state DFL and the governing apparatus is designed to facilitate the interests and desires of the mostly white property-owning class and to manage the discontent of the working classes. What my experience has taught me is that in order to create the changes that we need, we have to let go of the illusion of cross-class partnership and look beyond the narrow parameters of the sanctioned community engagement. We need to organize proactively for our own interests in a serious way, on every front. In policy spaces, in our neighborhoods, and in our workplaces. And we have to be willing to disrupt business as usual if we are at all serious about stopping gentrification and creating an alternative. Following the steps laid out to us by developers and city bureaucrats will lead to our further impoverishment, will lead to further gentrification. With that being said, this also affirmed for me that reality is always nuanced and that maintaining channels of communication across class lines and on different sides of issues is a positive good and can create pathways for organizing. I think it's also good to be able to depersonalize our class positions in these scenarios, both to allow for clear and honest critique that can be uncomfortable, and also to make space for human connections and to humanize one another. I want to be clear that I really respect Dayna Frank and appreciate her talents and her energy. And I want to say thank you for coming on to the show. It was a real honor. For the listeners, we didn't edit this interview at all and really hope it can help you on your search for more information and help you to form an informed opinion on this development and the bonding request, and then to take action if you feel moved to do so. So here it is. Dayna Frank, owner and CEO of First Avenue Productions, on the Money, Power, Land, Solidarity podcast for a critical interview on the Upper Harbor Terminal development. Hope you enjoy. All right. Hey, welcome. Thanks for tuning into the Money, Power, Land, Solidarity podcast. We are honored to have a special guest with us today. We are here at the beautiful First Avenue legendary music venue in downtown Minneapolis, sitting down with the owner of First Avenue, Dayna Frank. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I just first want us to say, I love the podcast. I love the issues you're exploring and the depth and the quality of the conversations, and I'm really, really happy to be here.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Well, let's jump right into it. The first thing I wanted to ask is if you could just describe to us your relationship with First Avenue, how you came to be sitting in the seat of owner and CEO of First Avenue.
Yeah, so First Avenue was started in 1970 by a guy named Alan Fingerhut, who happened to be my father's best friend from elementary school. And so my father did not come from any money. Alan came from the Fingerhut family wealth. My dad's parents, owned a little grocery store, and he went to college and got his CPA. So he was involved in the beginning of First Avenue kind of as a friend who helped with some numbers and used his CPA. And that was his relationship with First Avenue up until around 2000, when the owner of the property that we're sitting in now, First Avenue, was a guy named Ted Mann, who owned the theaters and a lot of properties around Minneapolis. He didn't want to own the building anymore.
Ted Mann Concert Hall, am I making that up? That's a real thing at the university, right?
Probably, yeah. And so he offered to Alan, who was the tenant here, the opportunity to buy it. So Alan and my father put together the funding structure and the investment structure to be able to purchase the property. And then in 2004, Alan and my father had a falling out. And you might remember, but First Avenue fell into bankruptcy. First Avenue, the operations. And so at that time, my father was the sole landowner. And so he was able to purchase the assets of the operating company out of bankruptcy and became the sole owner of First Avenue, the operating company. And then in 2009, he had a stroke. And I was living and working in film and TV in LA, and kind of jumped on a plane and came home to figure out like what was going on and what we would do in case he didn't recover. And I think maybe having been away from First Avenue for so long, I just like fell in love with the club and Minneapolis again and the scene, and made it my life.
Awesome. So when did you assume ownership of First Avenue?
2016, I purchased the operations.
Oh, okay.
I'm not the owner of the building.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who does own the building?
It's the family. My dad.
I see. Thank you. Could you talk a little bit about the shift since 2016, your ownership? First Avenue has done some expansion and some growth. Can you talk about that a bit, and how many venues does First Avenue own?
Yeah, we opened the Depot Tavern, the restaurant next door, in 2010. And that was a check cashing business before. And then in 2013, we took over the Turf Club in Midway, St. Paul, and kind of renovated it and then put it back together to look exactly like the old Turf Club, which we love so much. But we did things like we put in air conditioning, and we made the bathrooms bigger, and did a lot of a new roof and infrastructure, and then recreated the same Turf Club that everybody loves. And that was just a really positive experience for us. We got a lot of people saying thank you, and thank you for keeping it independent. And then especially when the soccer announcement started, we got a lot of people saying wow, it would have been a Starbucks. And so we started to think about the power of local ownership, and the power, what you talk a lot about, is the power of that land ownership and being able to, control the destiny through the land, and being oh, we're dedicated to music, we're dedicated to Minneapolis, we can make sure that can never be a Caribou or a Starbucks or whatever. And so then in 2014, I believe, the city of St. Paul wanted to renovate the Palace Theater. And so they brought us in as the operating partner, and we were able to work on the construction and basically advise from a music perspective, what could make this successful for St. Paul. So the Palace Theater opened in 2017. And then just by virtue of circumstance, we took over the Fitz and the Fine Line both in late 2018, early 2019.
Okay, cool. So it's First Avenue, the Turf Club, Palace Theater, the Fitz, and the Fine Line. Awesome.
So our company philosophy, or what we aim to do, is to be able to help bands grow from the 50-person clown lounge, and to be able to grow with them and help support their career all the way up to the Palace. We do shows in the Armory. We're doing, we'll do an arena show if a band, wants us involved and asks us to.
Awesome. Could you talk about how many employees work across First Avenue Productions, and then if you could speak a little bit about how many are full-time, how many are part-time, how many are seasonal?
Yeah, we have about 460 employees, which is staggering. The number grows a little bit. We have, I think our average tenure is something like 10 years. We have bartenders that have been working here for 32 years, and stagehands and security that have just been here for an inordinate amount of time compared to other service industries. We have about 45 full-time, which it might have actually gone up to 50 We have some full-time employees at the Fitz and such. And I believe that was your question.
Yeah.
We have, I think, if you count like full-time equivalents, like 25, 30 hours, we maybe have like, let me restate that. We have probably 10 to 20 hourly employees that are working 20 to 30 hours a week.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Usually when you say FTEs, you amortize all the hours and then you reduce it down. I'm not sure about that number.
Yeah. Can you talk a bit about the ownership structure of First Avenue? How does the ownership structure of the company work?
Yeah, it's me 100%.
Okay. So
yeah, pretty simple.
What's the title there?
My title?
Yeah.
CEO, owner.
CEO and owner. Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's can you talk a bit about how some of the decisions get made, in terms of how do you produce all this magic?
I mean, it's funny to hear you talk about titles. Like, we have a relatively, open and collaborative, and we don't put a lot of stock in what your title is. I tell people all the time, you can call yourself Queen of the Universe. That's totally fine, but, do your job,
That's what I tell my niece.
Yeah, totally. So you can call me the janitor. That's totally fine by me. I don't, it is what it is.
Yeah.
So how do decisions get made? We have an executive team, and we have, like I said, a lot of employees that have been here for 10 plus years, that have given their lives to First Avenue, that care a lot. And so we'll bring in people that, show any interest in a certain topic, and let, basically people that have the initiative and the desire have a hand in decision making.
Cool. Are you able to speak on the total wealth and assets of First Avenue Productions?
Between all of the companies, I think we'll do around $25 million in revenue. Most of that is ticket sales that go directly to the band, so it's not like, it sounds like a giant number, but in reality, a lot of that we're just kind of like a holding company.
What do you see as the vision? What's your vision for First Avenue? Where do you want to take things? What does the next chapter of First Avenue look like for you?
I really want to make Minneapolis, St. Paul the best place in the world for artists to live and create and grow their careers and support themselves and raise their families. And so, the last 10 years or so, we felt like in order to do that, we wanted to have control of the venues so that we could make sure they were maintained properly, make sure they have air conditioning, make sure that security was nice to people, was respectful of people. There's a lot of things that we do at First Avenue that is not industry standard. If you're, can I swear?
Please.
Okay. If you're a drunk asshole elbowing your way through the crowd, you're going to get kicked out.
Yeah.
And so that is not standard in clubs across the country, Most, a lot of other clubs will be like, hey, that guy's spending money, give him another drink. Whereas we always put first and foremost the security of the concert goer and the experience of the artist. And so in order to be able to run the shows the way we wanted to, we had to be able to have the venues. And so we feel really proud of what we've accomplished, to be honest, that we're able to support the local scene, support local artists, do a lot of really cool residencies. And I think where we're going to go from here is we'll see, how best we can support the community.
I had a follow-up question come to me. I really like exploring that dynamic between ownership and operation. So what you're saying is in a lot of situations, you might have folks booking shows or folks running the talent company, but they don't own the venue. So there's a conflict in authority as far as what's the culture of the shows and what's the culture of the environment. And the situation as it works here is your family owns the building and you own the company that does the operations.
Right.
How does that work across the First Avenue venues? Is that the same relationship at the Turf Club?
Yeah, the Turf Club is a separate, corporate structure-wise, it's a separate, real estate holding company.
Okay. Who is that real estate holding company?
That is, I believe that is a mixture of myself, some employees, and my father.
Okay. How about the Fine Line?
You're asking me a lot of details. The Fine Line we actually just rent. We operate it.
Okay. Who owns the Fine Line?
Dario Anselmo.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, he's a not related to First Avenue at all.
Okay. Cool. All right. So we're going to shift and ask some questions around the Upper Harbor Terminal. I think folks listening to the podcast are probably familiar, but just an introduction. We're talking about 48 acres of city-owned land on the north side riverfront that's in a contentious redevelopment project. And we're sitting here with Dayna Frank of First Avenue, who's one of the partners on the development team. So my first question to you is, what did you think about the resignation of two members of the Collaborative Planning Committee? This is the group that was appointed by the city to be the community representatives, and recently the co-chair and another Northside developer made a public resignation from the committee, raising some serious concerns. I'm just curious if you read the letter and if you have any thoughts on their criticism.
Yeah, I thought Paul's letter was really powerful. I mean, it's really intense, difficult, complicated work, and it's not surprising that there were resignations. There was one area of Paul's letter that really, it frustrated me because it's exactly what we're trying to do. And so sometimes I feel like the communication is not there. There's like a disconnect between, what the intent is and what people are hearing and seeing and feeling, which is, I blame, myself and everybody and everything. But,
do you want to go into that piece of the letter? Do you want to speak on it?
Yeah, there was an area, and I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going to paraphrase and correct me.
No, it's cool. I can pull it up actually while you're going, just so we have it to look at.
No, he said, how can we even start talking about design when we haven't talked about, the benefits and the social constructs and what we want from this development. And so when we started talking about the amphitheater, like that's exactly how we constructed the conversation with the CPC, which is, what do you want this to be? What do you want the benefits? Before we start talking about pretty pictures or design or layout or anything, like let's what ingredients do we want to use to bake this cake, and then let's bake it and see where it comes out. And so that was a part of Paul's letter. I was like, this is what we were trying to do,
I could understand that. I think to some degree that's like a issue of communication. But then I'm curious because I saw the blueprints for the music venue the first time we ever spoke.
Yep.
So to me, that kind of begs a question as far as like, I did see the designs, and I was one of the earlier people probably from the community side to see the design. So I resonate with Paul's criticism because to me it does seem like there was a lot of things set in place and even designs for structure set in place before the real deep community engagement folks. So for example, I guess one of my criticisms of the CPC is there's asking good questions, and I think you're earnest in asking those questions about what community wants. But when there's already some legal documents signed and some blueprints built, it seems like it's not giving community full stake. You see what I'm saying?
Totally. And that was an error, is that we should have started in saying all those blueprints, everything you saw, that's thrown out. Now we're starting with what's in the concept plan, which is a 7,000 to 10,000 person music venue at X location. Everything else is, community-led design and community-led focus.
Those are some fairly strict boundaries, though, when you think about it in terms of like, well, I guess I think about 48 acres of public land and even being told there's going to be a music venue, and it's going to we already decided the size of it. It seems like I wouldn't be surprised if the community would get to that place but from the sake of principle, it's like, that's not giving folks real choices because there's one example could be use the bonding money to build public housing right there. And was that giving the same, were folks given that option? You see what I'm saying?
Totally. And I don't believe that public housing is eligible for these bonding funds. And I am not a bonding expert, so you can research and I could be wrong. But, the specific GO bonding funds in the bonding bill are designed for, infrastructure and capital, and I believe there's other bonding funds for housing, which I believe the city is looking into and will access. But this is this bonding that, is going to be in front of the legislature soon is not designed for that purpose. I don't believe.
No, I think you might be right about that. And I don't want to parse too deep into the details. So,
But I do want to talk about the bonding issue.
let's
I do
do
think
it.
it is really important.
Okay.
And I know when we first sat down, I want to say, I think I like ran after you at a meeting. I was like, Parks and Power, I'm desperate to talk to you because, I really wanted to make sure like we were on the right path. And that was a frustrating part for me during the process, is that, we were not out in community as much as we wanted to be, and we weren't talking to as many people as we thought should have been. And so that's why I was like, I just wanted to get your read, And we sat down and I showed you the designs. And I think you even said this in your interview with Paul, like, they're beautiful, right? And it is, I understand it. You don't want to get swept up in it, but it is beautiful. And you start to think like, wow, if this could happen on this site, that could be really cool. And we also sat down and I said, this is going to require public funding, because all of the community engagement that we had done, everything came back saying, we want it to be public. We want to be able to access it. We want a green space. We don't want it to be private, which I actually believe has been borne out in the last year of engagement also. No one's saying this should be private. And so I think one of the issues becomes is if it's a public amenity and a public asset and the public is asking for it to be public, then there has to be some kind of public financial support.
Certainly. I think my read on that is I'm not opposed to public bonding money used to build something beautiful over North. I want that with all my heart, really. My question becomes community benefit then, where even if there's, I think that bonding money should go to building wealth for folks who don't come from wealth, for working class Northsiders. So if it takes the specific form of a music venue, then to me, at every level, the folks who are poised to receive the revenues and receive the full benefits and receive the full ownership should be working class Northsiders, folks from Northeast Minneapolis, brown and black folks.
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more, which is, I think why we did the learning table about ownership. And I think people were really confused. Like, we're talking about an amphitheater. Why are we talking about ownership? But that, to me, is the crux of the issue. Like, if the city is not going to own it, which they have said, they're fine sponsoring the bonding, but they don't want to be the long-term owner. And I said, I don't want to be the owner. That's not what the public is asking for. So who is that owner? And it was a conversation, it was actually generated by a conversation we had in the hall in city council where you said, well, what about a community ownership?
Yeah.
And it was like, of course, that's exactly what it should be.
And I think, and this is where, I think there is legitimate resonance there. I think there's a creative way to figure out a community ownership structure where then the profits and dividends could be recycled back to Northsiders and could be used to build wealth.
Totally.
Would you be open then to delaying the project? Because I feel like what we need is more time to figure that out. Because I think we could get there, and I think First Avenue could play a powerful role. But my concern then, and the concern I'm hearing from community is this is supposed to be approved in March. It's not serious to think that we're going to get there by March. And once it's approved, then I think we're locked in. And also that this is like a particular conversation I'm having with you. I also want to just say for the listeners out there, another dynamic then is the rest of the project in terms of the role of the POLADs and the role of other private interests. But we could just keep it in our conversation. So do you think we need more time to get there?
I don't think we need more time. I do think, and I don't think you are of this mind, but there are a lot of people trying to obstruct this project in any way possible.
Could you say more about that? Because I hear people levy that criticism, and I'd like to hear more about what that means.
Yeah, I saw an email like literally the other day, yesterday, that said, obstruct, 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 do everything we can to delay and shut down the project, and if you can't delay and shut it down, then make everyone's life as miserable as possible. And so when you say, are you open to delaying it, obviously that to me says death of the project. And I also see like all of the good things and the positive movement that's happened on this project, and that it's poised to become really transformative and really powerful.
I want to put a pin there because I'd like to ask to get into talking about what those transformations and how it could look. But to respond to that email, or somebody who might take that tact and say, you know what we need to do now is obstruct. I can completely understand that, and I can completely agree with that. Not to say, to me, that doesn't mean that nothing will ever happen at the Upper Harbor. The city owns the land. That's prime real estate. It's actually early in the process where you still have the GAF shingles factory there. You still have the rest of the industrial riverfront. there's no reason that something has to happen this year. So I think what's being put out there is a false argument that says, people are trying to destruct and say the North Side can't have nice things. That's not at all what I'm saying. To me, why I would say it's important to obstruct right now is because there's no anti-displacement measures in place for North Minneapolis. The neighborhood I come from was gentrified. So somebody saying obstruct, they're not losing anything from that. They're only poised to lose from this project going through. So I think it gets also to the idea of like class interest and the interest of people in different positions where you're a leader on the project, that's your perspective. But for a Northsider who, even if there have been good efforts, hasn't been engaged, I think that's a legitimate position to take.
I guess I see the difference between obstruct, and anti-displacement measure, community benefits, more affordable housing. And those are very different tracks to me.
But when there's a exclusive rights agreement that's set to be confirmed and land sold in March, you can't get to anti-displacement measures without a delay. So to me, just to be clear about what I would propose, I would say stop the project where it is right now and dedicate funding for a year or 2 more years to get it right, to really consider ownership structures, to really build new models. And I think you could do that with good faith. And I'd like to pivot and ask a question
That's what we've been trying to do for a year.
But
with obstruct. And so you go into these conversations and you hit on it, I think in one of the podcasts I listened to, where we started to get into really interesting discussions at the learning table about community ownerships, about cooperative versus small dollar investment versus community trust versus land trust.
Right.
And then the obstructors come in at the end and just start screaming and shut down the conversations. And so when you say delay a year, even if you're inclined, I'm inclined to say, yes, let's get this right. I've always been a let's get this right person. There's nothing saying that the next year is going to be any different from the last year.
I think there would be actually, though, because the reason I have to say I honestly take a bit of an offense to the idea that obstructors stand up from the back and tear down meetings, where even if I've seen people communicate less than gracefully, but that's condescending, I think, to Northsiders who have put their heart and soul into this project. And really, the only time they get to speak is at the end of the meetings a lot of times. And I'll say this about those learning tables. I very much love that conversation. I think that conversation is disingenuous when there's a exclusive rights agreement signed and there's specificity to the tune of the size of the venue already in place. It's not authentic to ask people to engage in those questions. And my read, not from you, but definitely my read from the city and from other members of the development team, is that those are placating conversations. It's not a serious commitment. And I'd say why years in the future would be different than this year is because the initial call, like when we had that dialogue at City Hall, community stood up very clearly last year and said, don't approve the concept plan, come back for co-creation. So now people who are retaining the same legitimate line of criticism, people raising legitimate points, are being painted as unreasonable obstructors. And I think that's an issue. I think the city's used to not dealing with the public, so it's easy to paint people out as obstructors when they're raising tough questions,
Totally, and that's not who I literally am referencing an email that I saw yesterday that said obstruct. And I'm not, I think there is so much value into the hard conversations. I mean, I'm here. Right? I'm
Respect
putting
for that.
all
Certainly.
my trust in you guys. You have all the editing power. But like I said, I think there's value in people being able to hear these conversations.
Me too.
And I think that, whatever happens with Upper Harbor, the next project on the line, or another city that's learning from this, I think these are the kinds of conversations that move society forward. And I'm really happy and honored to be here, like I said. And so honestly, I just want to specify, I deeply apologize. I did not mean to offend.
I appreciate that. Can I ask you about that? Because I really do appreciate that. And I even had some hesitation scheduling the interview, not because I don't admire your work. I have a love for First Avenue. I love music.
We have that in common,
exactly.
Right?
But I just, one thing I want to be clear about in the project is I'm a socialist. This is a socialist podcast. I come from wage earners who don't have wealth. And what I see is that people who do have wealth, even good people, get a lot of platforms. So I was thinking, should we have this conversation, right, or is it all going to be for show? But I respect you and I think we are having a real conversation and a real dialogue.
Yep.
So I appreciate that. And also, Just curious to ask about what your experience has been like in these meetings where you're being asked tough questions, what you've learned from the process and what it's been like for you. If you could speak to any of that more of like the spiritual, emotional side of things.
It's what has it been like? I mean, the personal attacks and like the death threats and the really disgusting, misogynistic, anti-Semitic emails, I could definitely do without, for sure.
Yes, there's no place for that.
Yeah, that was definitely a new experience. And you know what, First Avenue, we're used to being the community partner.
Yeah.
You know, we're the little guy. Like in our industry, we're like fighting the man and fighting corporations and, you know, doing the right thing at every step of the way. So it was definitely a different experience. I remember the first meeting, I personally have been at every community engagement meeting. I thought it was really important for Northsiders and for the community to see that this was a priority to First Avenue and that we weren't just like sending somebody and the face wasn't going to change, that this was like one of the highest priorities at the company was to get this right and to listen and to learn and to hopefully put a project together that people would love and appreciate. And so that's why personally, you know, I'm spending my time and there at every step of the way. But it definitely, it's intense. It's intense.
Yeah, that's real. I think we can keep touching that
I don't
if
know
it
if this
comes
is helpful at
up.
all.
It's very helpful. No, I really do appreciate it. It definitely is. So I wanted to go back to this state bonding money and spend some time talking about that. Can you describe the bonding request, the amount of bonding money, and then how does this differ from a traditional stadium deal where public money goes to entertainment purpose and usually the community doesn't receive real wealth building benefits from that?
Right. So there's a $20 million request in that has to be matched. It'll be matched privately. And so it is not, it's a little different from like, I think what you're traditionally thinking of, like my taxpayer dollars. These are bonding funds that the state has that will go throughout the state. This is the only request in, I believe, for North Minneapolis. And it was, so it's not like what you were saying before is like, couldn't this bonding money go to public housing? That is not viable with the restrictions of these state GO bonds. So if this bonding request doesn't get approved, the money's going to go to Moorhead. It's going to go to Duluth. It's going to go to a different municipality. It's not like this is money that the city has in its budget that could get funneled anywhere. So it's a financing mechanism that's used for capital projects like this. State bonding was used for the Palace Theater in downtown St. Paul. It was used for CHS Field, for Orchestra Hall, for the Guthrie, these cultural institutions that the city believes has a public benefit. And so, if there were a way, if I could, just personally say, let's just put it into housing, I'd do that in a heartbeat. And I've told the city that, and I've told, United Properties, I'm like, if there's a better use for this funds. But the amphitheater was the project that was ready to go, that was actually eligible for these funds. It doesn't require any money out of the city budget. It's a prioritization of the city, but it's no city money that could be used for community policing or, other stuff the city pays for.
I hear what you're saying.
St. Cloud, they have an amphitheater. They got bonding funds last year. Like this is a funding mechanism that municipalities have used, that have been used for much more private developments, that have been used for, definitely things with much less community benefit than what we're proposing for this project. And so I just want to make sure that people know that you can fight the bonding and you can, testify against it, but then that money's going out of Minneapolis. It's not going elsewhere within Minneapolis or in North Minneapolis.
Yeah, I'm learning a lot about state bonding through this process. And I think another perspective about that bonding money is to say, I think there are other projects that could get funded in Minneapolis, even if maybe not this bonding cycle. The idea I ask myself is like, okay, if there's public money used to build something of public benefit, can we partner with and work with businesses that are cooperatively structured and that are owned by people of color, people who don't come from generational wealth? And just to challenge all of us to think, I can hear what you're saying though too, and I do think it has more public benefit than some of the other projects that could be in its place. That we don't have to compete against other working class people. I hope people in St. Cloud and people in Moorhead do get bonding projects, and I think that we can take an attitude of abundance and recognize that. I think one thing I hope that comes out of this project is that more working class people learn about the bonding process. Like, I'll admit that I didn't know anything about it, and we're trained not to know anything about it because we don't have capital to be there to partner, you know? So I appreciate I'm making an intention to learn more about bonding. The other piece about the bonding where I think it's why I can justify and understand, and I think people should be questioning the bonding money, is the context of gentrification. So I want to ask you more generally about that.
Yeah.
Can you talk about first, just to frame things, the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs at the University of Minnesota, has released some powerful studies that show the depth of gentrification in Minneapolis, both the northeast side that's adjacent to the Upper Harbor Terminal and the north side. North Minneapolis in particular is poised to be aggressively gentrified. There's a lot of private investment and real estate speculation happening. What do you think about the role of the Upper Harbor Terminal and gentrification? What are your thoughts around gentrification? How are you looking at it?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm a small business owner. I went to art school. I am not an urban, scholar. So what I am saying is just, as a human being and a citizen of Minneapolis. I just want to clarify that I have no training in this whatsoever. But, from what I see, it's happening already. And I think Upper Harbor Terminal has such a strong potential to put anti-displacement measures in place with the development, which, I can't think of. We've been, trying to study what else has been done across the country. Like, we went out to DC to study the 11th Street Bridge project, and everyone is studying this right now. No one's figured out the answers, and so I would hope that Upper Harbor has at least, groundbreaking or revolutionary attempts to stop displacement.
Do you have any specific examples of the things that you're considering?
I am not involved in those conversations.
Okay. In our research, one of the most effective tools to stop displacement is rent control. Mm-hmm. Where do you stand on the issue of rent control?
As a private citizen of Minneapolis, I think it could not be more important.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering,
I know it's a tricky subject. That's what your podcast is here for, right?
It can be, yes, it can be.
And so I know there's a lot of, people see benefits and see downsides, but, I think that if a family is in an apartment, they should be given every possibility and every resource to stay.
That's awesome. So one of my concerns back to the thread I wanted to connect with the state bonding money is that right now there's the delegation of Northside representatives, Bobby Joe Champion, Fu Lee, Raymond Dean, as well as other, the city is aggressively lobbying for these funds. They moved up to the #1 bonding priority across the city. You have a lot of people in the power structure advocating that these bonds have to happen this year when there's no anti-displacement measures in place. So can you understand why someone would not want to secure that bonding, which means if that bonding money gets invested, even if there's good ownership structures, it is absolutely going to raise the property values further over north. So why should we accept this bonding money when there's not, no disrespect, but you can't name one anti-displacement measure?
Oh, I agree. Like I said, I expect there to be anti-displacement measures. And if there's anything that I can do, if there's, research that you find that you think would be helpful that I can advocate for, or again, use whatever minimal power I have to push and push forward, I would love to do that.
Would you push the bonding request back then to the next bonding cycle until there can be a serious actual legal anti-displacement measures in place? Because my concern is I think...
No, but let's work to get it in place in the next 4 months.
It can't happen.
Why not?
Because there's a state preemption against rent control that we could, in the best case, overturn in a year. It's there. If we had all hands on deck, somebody powerful like yourself, we could get rent control in 2 years in Minneapolis. But I have serious conversations with real organizers, and it's just not possible to do in 4 months. There's also tenant opportunity to purchase as an anti-displacement measure that won't be signed into law within 4 months. There's
is that a state or a city issue?
That's a city issue that could be done at the city level. So that, to me, is the real hardcore conflict is
right,
that
and I think those are the things that we can work on together to make this development like really revolutionary and to really like put important measures into place. And I want you to know, like, I'm an advocate. I am all for that. Like, it's above my pay grade, but whatever I can do to help push that forward, I would love to do.
I would say this is it's not above anybody's pay grade. Everybody listening to this, we all got to get involved, you know, and you have
terrible phrase.
No, I didn't mean it like that.
You were totally right.
No, I wasn't trying to say that to say anything disrespectful to you, but because I tell myself those same questions or that same thing sometimes.
Right.
And I'm trying to challenge all of us to recognize we all have a place to play, which why to me, again, I'm not going to push too hard, but there's a fundamental contradiction in the pace of the project and the investment and the lack of anti-displacement measures. I heard the City Council President Lisa Bender lament the fact that they're attracting private investment before there's legal anti-displacement measures. And I think real advocacy and real leadership would be taking a hard stand and saying we shouldn't build anything and we shouldn't press go until those rent control, a moratorium on evictions, tenant opportunity to purchase is passed, you know? So
yeah, I mean, I would love to talk to you more about that because we can't push back the bond requests. Just first and foremost, if we push it back, it's never going to happen. And
I would challenge that. I think First Avenue isn't going anywhere. That land is in public ownership. I think it could come back and get a stronger funding in the next bonding cycle. We might have a different analysis, and also just in the political world, can't is always a matter of political will. You see what I'm saying?
It is a matter of political will, and there's political will on this project right now. And I would love to work with you to say, like, okay, how do we use that political will and turn it into the anti-displacement measures and the like forward-thinking mechanisms that we really need to have in place for this project? Because I think, from my perspective, if that political will dissipates or turns, I don't see how it comes back.
I guess to me, that's your analysis. We're sitting in different positions because there's not grassroots political will for this project, you know?
Right.
And that's like, I think that speaks to a lot of this. What I'd like to do is be able to talk about the specifics and have these hard conversations, but also point back to the structural issues. And I think some of the structural issues that are being exposed right now is that the folks, the state representatives, the city staff, and the folks who are in the rooms where power gets decided are in a different political context and living in a different world than the masses of working class people. And that's the wall we bump into. I think that obviously you can't change that yourself, but we both have to be a part of changing that, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah. Could I ask one more question? I had this written down and we've talked about it a bit, but I think while we're here, I want to ask it. One of the criticisms I've raised of the project, and I think it's important to raise, is the idea of this public land being developed by inheritors of wealth, particularly white inheritors of wealth, where the lead developer on the project, United Properties, owned by three successors, Jim, Bob, and Bill Polad, who inherited their father Carl's business and the billions that came with it. You're not at that level of wealth, and I'm not comparing you two, but
no.
The reality is, though, that you did inherit wealth,
for sure,
you know?
For sure.
I
acknowledge that privilege.
That's real.
I'm not trying to gloss over it.
Can you speak on, though, why a project built on public land, how is it justifiable that it should be businesses owned by inheritors of wealth as opposed to, again, cooperatively owned businesses, first-time business owners, brown and black folks from North Minneapolis? First
of all, we can agree that the city set a certain process into place in 2017. And that was the process that we followed, right or wrong. And I respect you so much because you're trying to break down those systems and, trying to change the very foundations of how we've built government and society. That's not my perspective. That's not how I operate. And so we followed a mechanism that the city set into place. And I just want to acknowledge that was right or wrong. That was the path that, they released the RFQ. We responded to the RFQ. We were awarded the RFQ. It was a process. I also want to clarify one thing that you've talked a lot about, that somehow this was like a closed process or that we somehow had any kind of inside track on the RFQ. They did a mandatory walkthrough. It was the end of August in 2016. And there were, I believe, 60 to 70 developers there that were interested in the project that, that are on record none of them decided to submit a response. Any of them could have. We were the only ones that took a look at the challenges of the site, the community engagement requirements, and knowing the project, that we were the only ones that chose to respond. You know, our response was like, I think it was like 150 pages. We had no idea we were going to be the only respondents. You know, we went into a competitive bidding process and we put our team together and we did it the best that we could. We didn't. I just want to make sure to specify that, like, in no way at all was this like inside baseball, or did we have any kind of inside track. I just want to.
I appreciate you saying that.
I've heard you on the podcast say this. Yeah. And it's like, no, that is not how it went. There were 60 developers there that could have submitted a response,
but nobody did submit a response.
Right.
And also, from my understanding, from the words of Brandon Champeau, is that meetings with the city started in 2014, though.
Yeah, but who else was having meetings with the city? Brandon wasn't the only developer meeting with the city on this site.
That's true. That's very true. And
know.
Again, to point it to structural issues, is that's an inside track that's not personal to you, and it's not like what people might think. What I'm not necessarily accusing, definitely not of you, but even what I wouldn't want to lift up is the idea that it was some type of conspiratorial corruption. More so that's the way the capitalist real estate economy functions, is that big money real estate developers who have the time and the money go meet at City Hall with elected officials, and that's what continues to expand the wealth gap. So I appreciate you laying that record clear, though.
Yep. And now I forgot where we were going with this project. Oh, how do I feel about white inheritors of wealth becoming the prime beneficiaries of this project?
Yes.
I think everybody involved in the project is trying everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen. And I can speak specifically for the amphitheater. So what you would call community benefits, I would call it just like the foundations of the project, is that all of the food and beverage and vending opportunities are first and foremost going to go to BIPOC entrepreneurs, current Northside residents. I mean, that is probably, I want to say 25 to 30% of the revenue generated going directly into the hands of those entrepreneurs. And, you know, we're not just going to like open up a booth and say, okay, who wants to occupy this? You know, we're starting to put mechanisms into place right now to build capacity in the community to make sure that there are entrepreneurs that are ready and supported and have seed funding and are going to be able to take advantage of that opportunity. And so, you know, that's just like one of the benefits and the mechanisms of what we're trying to do to make sure that the revenue from the site doesn't go to Dayna Frank or First Avenue or anyone else. And anything we can do, we took a look at like literally every single revenue stream and said, okay, ticket fees, that goes to the band. But we're going to put an additional ticket fee that goes back to the community. And, you know, initially we said, okay, it's going to be for community programming because that's what our initial round of engagement said was interesting. You know, if that's not interesting, it can go to a CDC or a community trust or et cetera. Maybe that can be used for anti-displacement measures, et cetera, what the community feels is necessary. You know, we think that can raise somewhere between $600,000 and $1 million a year going directly back into the community. You know, that's more than our projections show us profiting, and that's just straight off the bat. You know, we think you have 300,000 customers a year, average food and beverage spend is somewhere like $20. Let's say that's $6 million a year going directly into the hands of those BIPOC entrepreneurs. I mean, that's real wealth building opportunities. And that's, you know, First Avenue saying like, we want to use our power to create these types of opportunities. And how else can we do that? If there's other ways that we can do it, like, please, and this is, I think, why I get so frustrated with the obstruct, because we're here and we're saying we're listening. How can we do this? How can we help you? How can we use our power to make this project better? And so hearing obstruct doesn't help us make the project better.
Yeah, I understand that to a degree. I guess I'd, again, to share my perspective on that, it's from our angle, from a community perspective, obstruct feels like the only way to make the project better because you're only one voice on the development team, and a particular one, you know?
I'm trying.
I recognize and respect that. And I'm saying that to say, if the whole team had your attitude, I think things would look a little different. So the idea, again, is just, I'm not saying people didn't write the words obstruct or people aren't obstructing, but for my listeners out there, I don't want us to get discouraged to think that raising principled criticisms and competing for power is obstruction. You know, it's organizing for our best interest, and these are class conflicts, you know, that are real and have to be borne out. So
totally. And like I said, I don't view you in that vein at all, and I don't view this podcast, and that's not. And I apologize for going off on a tangent, but
it's not. No, it's
anyway,
good. I appreciate
sorry.
you. No, well, I think honestly, this feels like maybe a good place to wrap it up, unless you got anything else.
No, thank you.
Okay, cool. Well, I want to say on the record and in response to you sitting down, like, I really do appreciate this. It was like, I'm learning so much in this process, and like worked through a lot to sit down with you. And I really do appreciate your willingness to sit and the work that you do. And I'm sure we'll continue to be in hopefully generative conflict with one another. So thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for tuning in.
I hope we can find something to work on together. I think some of these, tenant right to buy, rent control, et cetera, I would love to sit down with you and talk about what we can do about that.
Yeah, socialism's all about collaboration. Oh, yeah,
Right.
Definitely. All right. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Money, power, land, solidarity.
We need money, land, solidarity. If you funny, stand very far away from me. We have running plans.